The colony world of New Providence wasn't supposed to be special. Nestled in a particularly unremarkable sector of space, it was one of hundreds of human settlements that had spread like silent seeds across the galactic frontier. From orbit, it looked deceptively vulnerable. A patchwork of agricultural domes, industrial complexes, and sprawling urban centers that seemed almost fragile against the vast darkness of space. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the Veloxian patrol ship approach on her tactical display, her fingers hovering just millimeters above the defense system activation panel. Unlike the bureaucrats and diplomatic corps, she understood exactly what was about to happen. The Veloxian commander believed this would be a standard intimidation run, a show of force meant to remind the human colony of its place in the galactic hierarchy. What the Veloxians didn't know was that New Providence had been preparing for this moment for decades. The colony's defensive infrastructure was a masterpiece of distributed intelligence. Every system, from the agricultural drones to the waste management networks, was a potential sensor. The moment the Veloxian ship entered the system, 1 million microscopic data points began correlating, analyzing, predicting. It wasn't just a defense system. It was a living, breathing organism of technological integration that had been quietly evolving beneath the surface of human expansion. "Incoming transmission," announced the communication officer, her voice carefully neutral. "Standard concordance intimidation protocol." Delina allowed herself the briefest ghost of a smile. Standard. As if anything about human colonies could be considered standard anymore. The Veloxian ultimatum crackled through the communication arrays, a blend of bureaucratic language and thinly veiled threat. Surrender colonial autonomy. Accept concordance oversight. Prepare for economic integration. The same script they had used on dozens of emerging species across the galaxy. But New Providence was different. Deep beneath the colony's primary defense complex, a network of quantum processors hummed with anticipation. These weren't simple military computers, but advanced computational matrices that had been learning, adapting, and wargaming potential scenarios for generations. Each processor was a descendant of centuries of human conflict resolution algorithms, military strategy simulations, and ecological adaptation studies. The colony's defensive response would not be a simple act of warfare. It would be a comprehensive demonstration. As the Veloxian ship completed its approach vector, something extraordinary began to happen. The colony didn't just activate its defenses, it transformed. Agricultural drones reconfigured into precision targeting systems. Communication satellites became integrated sensor networks. Even the waste processing facilities contributed to a multi-layered defensive strategy that defied traditional military logic. Captain Rodriguez didn't need to give an order. The colony itself was responding, its integrated systems moving with a fluidity that blurred the line between technological infrastructure and living intelligence. "Target locked," whispered the tactical officer, though no command had been explicitly given. The Veloxian commander was about to learn a fundamental truth about humanity. We don't just adapt. We redefine the entire concept of adaptation. The Concordance Central Intelligence Hub was a marvel of distributed computation, spanning 3 artificial planetoids in the Nexus cluster. Thousands of species contributed to its intricate network, each bringing unique computational perspectives. But on this day, the entire system ground to a horrified halt. Dr. Lyra Venn, a quantum computational analyst from the Araxian Collaborative, watched in numbing disbelief as the human fleet materialization data scrolled across her holographic displays. This wasn't just a military mobilization, it was something far more complex. Each human ship carried a signature that defied conventional understanding. Traditional scanners picked up only fragments, quantum entanglement markers, adaptive computational matrices, and energy signatures that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. It was as if the ships themselves were living algorithms, constantly rewriting their own operational parameters. "They're not building ships," Lyra muttered to her assistant, a young Nexian technician. "They're generating computational ecosystems." The most disturbing element wasn't the ship's physical construction, but their networked intelligence. Traditional galactic military doctrine assumed a hierarchical command structure. Humans had created something entirely different. A distributed network where each vessel was simultaneously an individual unit and a collective neural node. Intercepted communication fragments revealed glimpses of a staggering technological paradigm. The human fleet wasn't just communicating. They were engaging in a continuous, real-time computational dialogue that adapted faster than any known tracking system could interpret. Each ship was solving complex strategic problems in microseconds, sharing solutions across the fleet faster than light could travel. In the Concordance archives, xenohistorians began pulling records of human development. What they discovered was a terrifying pattern of systematic preparation. Human expansion wasn't random. It was a carefully orchestrated migration that had been planning this moment for generations. Colony worlds that seemed randomly distributed now revealed themselves as sophisticated forward positioning systems. What appeared to be agricultural settlements were actually advanced research nodes. Mining operations weren't just extracting resources. They were testing and developing technologies that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The quantum resonance of the human fleet was unlike anything in galactic records. Traditional species developed technologies sequentially, incrementally improving existing systems. Humans seemed to approach technological development as a holistic, adaptive organism. Each breakthrough wasn't just an improvement, it was a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. Dr. Ven's computational models began to break down. The human fleet's movement patterns suggested they were solving multiple strategic scenarios simultaneously, with each potential outcome being calculated and prepared for in real time. It was less a military operation and more like a living, breathing computational experiment. "They're not just preparing for war," Dr. Ven whispered to herself. "They're rewriting the fundamental rules of conflict." As the Concordance intelligence networks struggled to comprehend the emerging human strategy, something became terrifyingly clear. Humanity had been playing an entirely different game, with rules that no one else had even recognized existed. The gathering storm was no longer just a military threat. It was a complete paradigm shift that would reshape galactic civilization forever. Deep within the Concordance Research Citadel, Dr. Calthor of the Neuromorphic Sciences Division stared at the recovered fragment of human technology with a mixture of terror and reverence. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't biological. It was something impossibly between. The artifact had been extracted from the wreckage of the first destroyed Veloxian patrol ship, a small, seemingly innocuous component no larger than a human palm. Yet it defied every fundamental understanding of technological development that the galactic scientific community had established over millennia. Traditional xenotech analysis relied on clear distinctions: mechanical systems, biological systems, quantum systems. This human technology laughed at such simplistic categorizations. Its molecular structure shifted dynamically, with computational pathways that grew, adapted, and died like living neural networks. Embedded quantum processors intertwined with what could only be described as organic computational matrices, creating a symbiosis that blurred every known line between technology and life. "It's not just adaptive," Dr. Calthor muttered to his research team. "It's evolutionary." The component's core seemed to be built on principles of emergent complexity previously thought impossible. Each microscopic layer contained nested information systems that could reorganize themselves in response to environmental stimuli. It wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a living algorithm that could rewrite its own fundamental operating parameters. Comparative studies revealed a shocking pattern. This wasn't an isolated breakthrough. Every recovered human technological artifact showed similar characteristics: systems that learned, adapted, and transformed with a speed and complexity that suggested something beyond traditional artificial intelligence. It was as if human technology was less designed and more cultivated. Historical archives began to paint a more comprehensive picture. Human technological development hadn't been a linear progression, but a series of radical reimaginings. Each technological leap seemed to emerge from what appeared to be impossible constraints: limited resources, hostile environments, systemic challenges that would have ended the technological development of any other species. The research team discovered something even more disturbing. The technological fragment contained what could only be described as a form of distributed memory. Not simple data storage, but a complex informational ecosystem that seemed to learn and preserve knowledge across multiple potential configurations. It was documentation, adaptation, and evolution compressed into a single breathtaking system. Dr. Shen Lai, a human researcher who had been inexplicably attached to the Concordance research team, watched her colleagues with a knowing smile. She understood something they did not, that human technology was never about the device itself, but about the fundamental approach to problem-solving. "You're looking at it wrong," she finally said, breaking the tense silence. "This isn't technology. This is a cultural expression." The implications were staggering. If this single fragment represented humanity's approach to technological development, what did their fully realized systems look like? What potential lay hidden in their seemingly random colonies and research outposts? For the first time, the Concordance researchers understood that they were not dealing with a species that developed technology. They were confronting a species that grew technology like a living, breathing organism, unpredictable, adaptive, and fundamentally alien in its approach to existence. The fragment pulsed softly, almost imperceptibly, as if aware it was being studied. Admiral Orcs of the Trilateral Concordance Diplomatic Corps had spent 3 centuries mastering the art of interspecies communication. He had negotiated with silicon-based hive minds, telepathic gas clouds, and sentient plasma networks. Nothing in his extensive experience prepared him for the human communication strategy. The intercepted transmissions weren't just messages. They were carefully constructed psychological algorithms designed to do something far more sophisticated than simple communication. Each transmission was a multi-layered cognitive weapon that attacked not just the information processing centers of receiving species, but their fundamental understanding of reality. Human communication operated on principles that defied traditional diplomatic protocols. Where other species used precise, regulated communication channels, humans employed what could only be described as narrative combat. Their messages were living things, complex constructs that could simultaneously convey multiple layers of meaning, adapt in real time, and trigger specific psychological responses. A single transmission might contain immediate tactical information, historical context that challenged existing power narratives, emotional triggers designed to destabilize collective decision-making processes, embedded cultural references that could only be fully understood by those intimately familiar with human history, quantum-encoded subtext that changed meaning based on the receiver's cognitive state. The most terrifying aspect wasn't the content of these communications, but their delivery. Traditional communication interception systems simply broke down. Human messages seemed to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, their meaning shifting and adapting faster than any translation algorithm could track. Dr. Arya Chen, the human linguistics specialist embedded in the Concordance communication analysis team, explained it with maddening simplicity. "We don't just communicate," she said, her eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that made senior analysts deeply uncomfortable. "We tell stories." And those stories were weapons. Historical records began to reveal a pattern. Every major human expansion, every technological breakthrough, every diplomatic engagement had been preceded by a narrative preparation so subtle and complex that it made traditional propaganda look like crude finger painting. They didn't just prepare for conflict, they prepared the cognitive landscape in which that conflict would occur. The Concordance's most advanced psychological warfare experts began to comprehend the true nature of human communication. It wasn't about information transfer, it was about reality manipulation. A single human transmission could undermine centuries of established political structures, reframe historical narratives, create cognitive dissonance in entire species-wide decision-making processes, introduce conceptual frameworks that fundamentally challenged existing power dynamics. Admiral Orcs realized with growing horror that the human fleet wasn't just approaching with technological superiority. They were arriving with something far more dangerous, a comprehensive narrative strategy that could deconstruct entire civilizations without firing a single weapon. The communication intercept displayed on his holographic interface seemed to pulse with a living intelligence. It wasn't a message. It was an invasion, one that had already begun long before the first ship would appear on any tactical display. Humanity was writing a new story, and everyone else was about to become a character in it. In the depths of the Concordance Strategic Projection Center, holographic simulations flickered and died. Thousands of predictive models, each representing centuries of refined strategic calculations, collapsed like fragile glass structures. Commander Zirax watched in stunned silence as the human strategy unfolded, not as a linear progression of military actions, but as a cascading wave of probabilistic interventions that seemed to rewrite the very fabric of strategic engagement. What the Concordance called a strategy was a rigid, predetermined path. What humans demonstrated was something entirely different, a living, breathing computational ecosystem that treated warfare as a dynamic, adaptive process of continuous negotiation. Each human intervention targeted not just physical infrastructure, but the intricate web of systemic dependencies that held the Concordance's power structure together. They didn't attack enemies. They dismantled entire ecological systems of political and economic interdependence. A communications relay in the Orion cluster would suddenly go dark, not through direct destruction, but through a complex manipulation of economic incentives that made its continued operation financially impossible. A diplomatic alliance would fracture, not through direct conflict, but through the strategic introduction of information that exposed long-hidden systemic contradictions. The human approach resembled less a military campaign and more a form of systemic acupuncture, precise, minimally invasive interventions that caused cascading changes far beyond their immediate point of impact. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, not to be confused with the earlier Captain Rodriguez, had spent her career studying what she called complex system destabilization. Her research, once considered fringe academic speculation, now looked like a precise blueprint for galactic transformation. "We don't fight systems," she had written in her groundbreaking text, "Metamorphic Conflict Resolution. We understand their fundamental rhythms and introduce subtle modifications that cause self-directed transformation." The human fleet moved across strategic zones like a living, breathing computational network. Each ship was both an individual unit and a collective intelligence, sharing information and adapting strategies faster than any centralized command could comprehend. Traditional military doctrine assumed conflict as a zero-sum game, a direct confrontation where one side defeated another. Humans treated it as a complex adaptive system, where victory was about comprehensive transformation rather than simple domination. Their interventions created what strategic analysts called probability cascades, strategic actions that didn't just change immediate circumstances, but fundamentally altered the potential future trajectories of entire civilizations. A trade route would be subtly redirected. A technological patent would be strategically released. A cultural exchange program would be initiated. Each action was a thread in a complex tapestry of systemic transformation. The Concordance's most advanced predictive models, which had successfully managed galactic tensions for millennia, now looked like primitive counting devices compared to the humans' comprehensive approach. Commander Zirax realized with a mixture of terror and grudging respect that humans weren't just fighting a war. They were conducting a comprehensive redesign of galactic civilization's operating system, and they were doing it with the precision of surgeons and the imagination of artists. The probability cascade was already in motion, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Nexus system was supposed to be the Concordance's ultimate defensive stronghold, a marvel of distributed defensive architecture. It represented the pinnacle of collective galactic engineering. 17 different species had contributed to its construction, a testament to the Concordance's belief in unified technological supremacy. No one had considered what would happen when that unity encountered a force designed to understand and dismantle collective systems. Captain Maya Oko watched from the bridge of the human command vessel, Mobius, a name that was itself a mathematical joke about infinite complexity. The system's defenses weren't just failing. They were being systematically deconstructed in a way that defied traditional understanding of warfare. The attack, if it could even be called an attack, was more like a sophisticated form of systems debugging. Each defensive grid, each protective measure, each supposedly impenetrable barrier was being analyzed, understood, and then neutralized with surgical precision. Quantum entanglement communication networks collapsed not through brute force, but through an elegant exploitation of their own internal logic. Defensive platforms found their targeting systems slowly rewritten, their computational cores gradually repurposed. It wasn't destruction. It was a form of technological rehabilitation. "We're not destroying their systems," Maya murmured to her AI co-pilot, a distributed intelligence that was more a collaborative partner than a simple computational tool. "We're teaching them how to evolve." The human approach was horrifyingly elegant. Where other species saw conflict as a binary state, victory or defeat, humans approached it as a complex adaptive process. Each intervention was simultaneously a tactical action and a form of systemic education. Defense platforms that had stood unbreached for centuries began to reveal their fundamental vulnerabilities, not through direct assault, but through a comprehensive understanding of their underlying architectural assumptions. It was like watching a master locksmith examine a complex mechanism, understanding its every subtle movement, its every hidden weakness. Concordance military historians would later struggle to categorize what happened. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a war in any traditional sense. It was more like a comprehensive system update, performed by an entity that understood the current system far better than its original designers. The most terrifying element wasn't the technological supremacy. It was the underlying philosophy. Humans weren't seeking to destroy the concordance. They were attempting to fundamentally transform it, to help it understand its own systemic limitations. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, the lead strategic theorist embedded in the human fleet, had a term for this approach: constructive disruption. It wasn't about winning. It was about creating the conditions for comprehensive systemic evolution. As the Nexus system's defenses continued to be systematically rewritten, something extraordinary happened. The very systems designed to prevent invasion began to reveal their own potential for transformation. Defensive algorithms started to learn, to adapt, to understand their own fundamental nature in ways they never had before. Maya watched the holographic display, a ghost of a smile playing across her lips. This wasn't a battle. This was a conversation, conducted in the language of complex systems, with the patience of a species that understood that true change happens not through destruction, but through profound understanding. The fractal moment was unfolding, and nothing would remain the same. The chamber of the Concordance High Council stretched before them like a museum of failed power, intricate holographic displays flickering with the last remnants of their once absolute authority. Delegates from 17 primary species sat in stunned silence, their collective history of galactic governance crumbling around them. Dr. Aria Chen stood at the center of the chamber, not as a conqueror, but as something far more dangerous: a systems architect. Her presentation wasn't a military report. It was a comprehensive diagnosis of civilizational dysfunction, a clinical, almost compassionate deconstruction of the Concordance's fundamental structural failures. She moved through centuries of accumulated bureaucratic calcification with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of an evolutionary biologist. "Your system isn't broken," she explained, her voice carrying a tone of clinical observation rather than accusation. "It's experiencing a necessary transformation." The human approach defied every known model of conflict resolution. They hadn't come to destroy. They had come to perform what could only be described as a civilizational reset, a comprehensive intervention designed to address systemic limitations that had been accumulating for millennia. Each slide in her presentation revealed layers of interconnected failures. economic models that suppressed emerging species, communication protocols that prevented genuine cultural exchange, defensive structures that prioritize stagnation over adaptation, technological governance that limited collective innovation. What made the presentation truly terrifying was its complete lack of malice. This was a diagnostic report, delivered with the same emotional distance a doctor might use when explaining a complex medical procedure to a patient. The concordance delegates understood something profound in that moment. Humanity wasn't their enemy. They were a force of systemic rehabilitation. Traditional conquest required destruction. What humans were doing was far more comprehensive. They were performing a live systems update on an entire galactic civilization. Dr. Chen's final slide showed not a map of conquered territories, but an intricate ecological model. It demonstrated how the Concordance's current structure was fundamentally incompatible with the complex, rapidly evolving nature of galactic development. "We're not here to replace you," she said, her words cutting through millennia of accumulated political complexity. "We're here to help you understand your own potential." The human intervention was less a military campaign and more a form of comprehensive systems therapy. They had studied the Concordance's structure with the same detailed attention an ecologist might study a complex biological ecosystem, understanding every interconnection, every potential point of transformation. Delegates from species that had spent centuries in rigid hierarchical structures began to see something they had forgotten: the possibility of change. The most radical element of the human approach wasn't their technological superiority. It was their fundamental belief that no system was beyond rehabilitation, that complexity could be understood, that transformation was always possible. As Dr. Chen completed her presentation, the chamber remained in profound silence. The Concordance was about to undergo its most comprehensive transformation in recorded history, and humanity was offering to help them through it. The final negotiation didn't happen in a grand chamber or on a battlefield. It occurred in a small, unremarkable research station orbiting a neutron star, a location chosen for its absolute neutrality and its unique gravitational properties that seemed to blur the very fabric of space-time. Commander Zarak, once the Veloxian military officer who had initiated the first confrontation, now sat across from Dr. Elena Rodriguez. They were no longer representatives of opposing forces, but something far more complex, architects of a new galactic paradigm. "We didn't come to conquer," Elena explained, her hands tracing holographic projections that revealed intricate pathways of potential futures. "We came to unlock a potential that had been trapped for millennia." The neutron star outside created a mesmerizing backdrop, a constant reminder of how transformation occurs at the most extreme boundaries of existing systems. Its gravitational waves seemed to pulse in sync with the conversation, as if the universe itself was listening. What emerged was not a traditional peace treaty, but a comprehensive framework for galactic co-evolution. The humans weren't offering dominance. They were proposing a radical model of collective development that treated entire civilizations as adaptive, living systems. The negotiation moved beyond traditional diplomatic language. It was a complex dance of potential scenarios, each projection showing multiple branching paths of development. Quantum probability maps replaced static territorial boundaries. Cultural exchange became a form of systemic cross-pollination. Zarak realized that humans had approached this entire conflict as a form of collaborative problem-solving. They hadn't sought to defeat the Concordance. They had identified a systemic blockage in galactic development and proposed a comprehensive intervention. The most radical element wasn't their technological superiority. It was their fundamental belief in collective potential. Embedded in the negotiation framework were mechanisms that would democratize technological development, create adaptive governance models, establish dynamic cultural exchange programs, develop comprehensive ecological restoration protocols for multiple planetary systems. Each clause was a living algorithm designed to evolve and adapt rather than remain static. "We're not giving you a solution," Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of generations of human exploration. "We're providing a method of continuous self-discovery." Outside the negotiation chamber, the neutron star continued its ancient dance, a perfect metaphor for the continuous transformation they were proposing. Civilizations, like stellar bodies, were not fixed entities. They were dynamic, evolving systems with infinite potential. The final document wasn't signed. It was generated, a quantum-entangled agreement that would continue to evolve, to adapt, to respond to new information and changing circumstances. As the negotiation concluded, Commander Zarak understood something profound. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had simply shown everyone how to truly explore it.